It is my absolute pleasure to welcome everyone to this webinar, which I personally am so thrilled about. My name is Katie Carey Watts. Somewhere over here. Here we go. I work part-time at On the Move, where I spearhead our efforts in terms of research and publications. Before I start, I would like to thank our partner for this event, which is HowlRound, who is helping us to live stream this webinar. This webinar, my colleague Johan is going to introduce our speakers today, but this webinar is a bit of a follow-up for On the Move on something that we did at the end of 2022, which is commissioned a podcast episode made by yours truly, where I did an interview with a journalist named Hettie Judah, who has been working in the field of arts and culture for a long time and recently wrote a book about the issue of not specifically mobility, but about parenting in the arts. And so this is kind of a follow-up for us to get people who are speaking from different perspectives on this issue of parenting and care work and how it relates specifically to the specificity that is on the move, which is, of course, cross-border mobility. Just a few technical things before we get started. Please make sure that you mute yourself and you turn off your video for the duration of the main portion of this webinar. Of course, if you'd like to ask a question, at the end, feel free to unmute and turn on your video. This is being recorded and live streamed, so just for your information. And again, if you don't wish to appear visually, keep your video screen off. That's totally fine. We do have the possibility of having this event being captioned today. And so what you can do is in the bottom left of your Zoom screen, if you click on more, click on those three little dots, you should see a pop-up screen with the word captions on it. And if you click on it, you should be able to have captions. Yes, and at the end, if you would like to ask a question, we would just ask that you use the little reaction. Again, it's at the bottom and you can raise your hand. And I think that that's it. And it's now my absolute pleasure to hand this over to our moderator today, who is my wonderful colleague, Johan Flock. Johan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Katie. Thank you. It is great to welcome so many participants today for this conversation on parenting, care, and cultural mobility. So my name is Johan Flock. I'm the Director of Operations at On the Move. And for participants with visual impairment, I'm a white man in my mid-40s. I'm wearing a beige sweater and I'm using a digital white background with the logo of On the Move on it. My pronouns are he, his. As you may know already, On the Move is the international information network dedicated to artistic and cultural mobility. So we gather 66 members from 24 countries. And last year we celebrated our 20th anniversary. We provide regular, up-to-date, free information on mobility opportunities and funding. And we advocate for the value of cross-border cultural mobility. We are funded or co-funded by the European Union through the Creative Europe program. And we deliver or try to deliver quite ambitious multi-annual program. So as part of these programs, we propose twice a year mobility webinars to investigate mobility-related themes. And today we propose to explore the tensions between cultural mobility or international mobility and parental responsibility in the UN and internationally. Considering that transnational collaboration and mobility is an integral part of the trajectory of artists and cultural professionals, we want to discuss how our ecosystem considers and manages parenthood, and particularly for women. So why do we propose this conversation today? Because at On the Move, since we are a very interesting observatory point, we see these tensions that have been not growing, but at least in the spotlight for many, many years now. And of course, parenting in the arts is something that is very old as a theme, but quite new in the level of awareness that we can, see, especially in these post-pandemic times we are navigating. already a few years ago, through a very interesting European project called Shift, On the Move worked on issues related to post-Me Too movement, addressing gender-based violence. And when unfolding these post-Me Too realities, many more broader challenges came to light, in particular the working condition of artists and cultural professionals, including parenting issues. But we collected many testimonies throughout the years on how you are a parent and a working parent, where you have to travel internationally to venues and festivals, when you have to present work at biennales or apply for projects for yourself as an individual artist, but for yourself as a family, when you have partners and kids to travel with. Collecting testimonies were made quite informally, and very recently we came up with a critical mass of testimonies around the conditions of working artists and how our ecosystem was not always well equipped to welcoming families. These testimonies were colliding where other concerns in our ecosystem. How do we move or be mobile, cross-border, with environmental concerns and more sustainable practices? So slow mobility, green mobility, longer mobility experiences abroad. So how do you do that when you are a parent? Quite recently, On the Move decided to monitor several accessibility aspects in all the open calls we signpost across the year, but also the funding sources and grants we collect and share through our mobility funding guides. This aspect of parenting in the arts is quite invisible still. And invisible in the sense that solutions are found by organizers, by festivals, by artist in residence programs, but these solutions or accompaniment measures are not publicized, and they are rarely clearly described in open calls. When we commissioned to Point of Entry and to Katie a podcast on the topic, we were quite aware that this topic is quite discussed in several parts of the world, but we also realized that most of the literature available is coming from the UK and from Northern America, and many parts of the world don't have yet put forward charters, guidelines, guidance, and testimonies online. So today we are going to explore this with three wonderful arts professionals. We are going to explore the realities of parenting in the arts, with the idea that we not only talk about artists, but also cultural professionals, as we consider in our ecosystem, all the producers, agents, tour managers, managing directors are also part of the conversation. And we are choosing the word parents and not just mothers, also as an acknowledgement that even if women are overwhelmingly responsible for childcare, we also want to include other parents in this conversation. Today we're going to go through a conversation that will be around an hour and a half. We want to have a conversation with the three panelists around what are the conditions for cultural stakeholders to avoid reducing their international experience and international exposure. We want to see what kind of solutions they could encounter in their professional trajectory and through grassroots initiatives to continue international collaborations. And we would like to, at some point, collect recommendations for the cultural fields, recommendation for ourselves, recommendations for decision makers and policymakers. So today, I know that the scope of the conversation could really go wild and crazy, because parenting touch upon many issues, personal issues, professional issues. But because of the very nature of On the Move and our core mission, we will try as much as possible to address cross-border mobility, so the international projects, this international dimension that we value. So today with me, we have three panelists. We have Casey Rain, who is an actor, a film, television, and theatre actor based in the UK, but she's also the co-founder and joint CEO of Parents and Carers in Performing Arts. So welcome, Casey, and very happy to have you here. We have with you Emeka Udemba, who is a Nigerian artist currently based between Lagos and Freiburg, so between Nigeria and Germany. And as a visual artist, he worked using many media, installations, video performances, photographs, drawing, paintings. But what also is interesting with Emeka is that he leads and founded a residency space in Lagos called Project Space Lagos, an independent space for contemporary art that has been existing for more than 10 years. So we will be also discussing with him what are the conditions to welcome parents in his space. And we will also have with us Louise Michel Yu, who is a producer and tour booker working in the contemporary circus field. He's been working for supporting artists, companies developing their artistic projects, their performances, and to tour these performances in Europe and at global level. She's the co-founder of L'Avant Courrier, which is a very particular support organization for the circus artists in France. So welcome, you three, and maybe I will ask you when you take the floor to do a very brief presentation of yourself physically for our participants with visual impairment. I will probably ask a first question to you, Louise Michel. When preparing this conversation, we had very valuable exchange around what are the conditions for artists to actually prepare the world or prepare the ecosystem in them being parents. And I would like to ask you, how far do you go into conversation with artists that are becoming parents or are about to become parents to prepare what could be a potential impact on their work life, and in particularly you working in the circus field, to give us some examples of the conversation you have with your artist. You need to unmute yourself, maybe.
Sorry, I'm Louise Michel Yu. I'm a white woman, for around 40. I'm blonde with a white strand of hair and yellow pullover, for you to know. So how we prepare the parents or persons about to be parents must first of all say that it's been a great evolution. The L'Avant Courrier, the organization I'm running with other 4 women, we implemented it in 10 years ago, sorry. And I can see the evolution through the times about those questions. From the very beginning, we've been working with parents or people about to be parents. And I see that we hopefully we are moving forward, and so how we prepare that, I see that from at the beginning of the bureau, we did not talk so much about it. It was more about between the artists, they were talking about it and taking this in charge by themselves. And now we are trying to create this conversation, because the very first step for us is the discussions inside the teams. From the experiences we had, it was very difficult in some teams, like kind of trauma for parents, that they are not heard about that. That the only answer was, okay, it's a private matter, and you should deal with this. And this is the very first step, which is quite difficult. And something more in circus, like more particular to circus, is the question of physical and also physical like condition, and also of partners. Like, of course, in some other arts, you also have partners, but in some circus disciplines, you are partners, and you cannot work with another partner like after 2 weeks. You need like real great time of rehearsal and knowing each other, etc. So this is really particular to circus, and we are trying to raise the conversation about this. And from the tensions we had inside the teams was also that all the people needed to be taken into consideration, not only parents, obviously. So this was our very first step. And recently in France Biennale in Marseille, there was a discussion about these topics, and the discussion went on the physical recovery for people. And I talk about it because the artists who were talking about that, especially from Compagnie Bassinga, if you want to learn a bit more, they were saying that it is important also to prepare during the pregnancy for circus artists in particular. So we hope that the National Circus School in France will prepare this for the next year, to have 2 sessions during the year to work physically with people who are pregnant and after they gave birth, to be back on stage. So it's a few things I can tell from the very beginning.
But that's interesting, because what you are pointing out in a way is that in these cases, the ideal balance between private life and work life explode. I mean, there's no a border anymore, in the sense that when a collective of artists or an artistic company works together, create performances together, when one is having a baby, actually the entire company or the entire collective is having a baby, because everybody needs to adjust to the very reality of the impact that it will have on the trajectory of a collective artistic trajectory. And the first is, and the second thing that is interesting is the idea that you mention examples in France that are quite interesting in the circus field. And I'm sure we could find similar experiences in the dance field, that artists have recovery plans for rebuilding their body, or being fit again to perform and use their craft again, and try to recover from sometimes difficult pregnancies. So it's interesting that an art school is involved in this process of supporting mothers and welcoming them back to school to actually practice and make sure they can go back on track with their artistic and creative practice. I'm gonna ask now a question to Emeka. Emeka, we don't see you. Maybe you can put your video on. Welcome, Emeka. The same, before taking the floor, I will ask you to describe briefly for our participants with visual impairments. Emeka, you are an artist that is navigating several countries, not only because you live between two continents, between Germany and Nigeria, but also because of your artistic practice. You have a lot of projects that takes place in different parts of the world. You are invited in biennales, you are putting exhibitions on, etc. And I was wondering that if the very fact of being a father impacted your international projects, and how, if they did.
Yeah, thank you, first of all, so much for this very important forum. As you said, first, I want to introduce myself again. I'm Emeka Udemba. I'm an artist, and I'm also the facilitator of Project Space Lagos in Nigeria. So Project Space is a space that offer interdisciplinary possibilities for artists, and we also offer residency possibilities. Yes, as an artist, as an active one at that, I think there's a conception that being a parent or being an artist and being a parent is something that you can either choose one or the other. But I find in today's world, I think we should be able to kind of combine things together and make them work. And the fact that most of the time, if you're talking about parenting, most of us, we also think it's just the women that are doing the parenting. But I think we should also start including men, because for me, I also had to, manage the situation of being one part of the parent, being an artist, and dealing with that situation of going to residencies also with my kid. And I find, instead of being like almost like a negative being a parent, I find it's actually enriching. If both partners, if the artist and the, say, facilitators, like they say, the residency spaces, have a common goal, because the common goal will be to enhance the, or give the artist the opportunity to almost improve or explore further his practice. And if this is the main goal for the two entities that are into this process, I think for me, my experience is that both ways, or both partners will have to be very flexible in the way they kind of construct this relationship. If they are flexible, there are ways to go around difficulties. Definitely, it's challenging to be a parent and an artist. The first residency that I did with my kid is when my daughter was 6 months old. And I found it in the beginning, it was scary to travel with a 6-month-old kid. But at the end of the day, it was one of the most interesting aspects, because a 6-month-old kid just eats and sleep. So, you just feed the kid, put her in bed. She can't run away. She can't move. She just sleeps. So you have all the time in the world to be creative. You just need to, peep in once in a while and see that she's fine, and you are good to go. And then the second time I had also, experiencing when my kid was also maybe 9 or 10, it was also easy, because I had to kind of try to incorporate her into my work, make her part of my work, and then find time to go to these residencies when she has long time breaks. So if the partner is willing to be accommodating, the times that you can go for a month or two would be no problem, because most schools have when they have long breaks, it's either a month or two. So you can use those breaks and do those residencies with your kid. And, those moments are really even intensive periods where you actually have your kid to yourself and you're doing your work. So instead of being a minus, I see it really as very enriching to the whole overall creative process.
Yeah, that is very interesting also that you share your experience, and what I see also in what you share, that you point out the fact that it takes a conversation. I mean, in a way, it's tailor-made, and the gatekeepers or the facilitators, the host of residencies, but I'm sure this could apply to festivals and other artistic events that welcome artists for work, for creation, for presentation, need to be flexible. So to listen, actually, which I find it very interesting that we are already in this recommendation mode. Let's listen to the parents. Let's work with them on what is the solution that fits best according to the age, obviously, of the kids or the children, but also according to the availability of all the adults surrounding, so the partners or the carers that could support. So it takes a constellation of small or big efforts to make things happen, which I find very interesting. Casey, if I go to you, again, I will ask you to briefly describe yourself. What was striking for me is I've heard of the PIPA initiative already years ago when it all started. And I remember the success of the campaign that was led, and the the resonance or the success of reaching out a lot of practitioners from the performing arts to say, this is a blind spot, we should be working on this all together. Could you tell us a little bit more about the premises of the PIPA campaign?
Yeah, sure. My name is Cassie Rain. I am a white female in my 40s. I've got long brown hair and a ponytail, and I'm wearing brown jumper with black polo neck. I'm sitting in my kitchen, picture of London behind me. It's really lovely to be here, because and to be part of this conversation, because when we founded Parents and Carers in Performing Arts 6 years ago, there was no dialogue. There was, there was no conversation. So I am an actor, and my business partner, Anna Enel-Danailov, the other co-founder, is a theatre director. And we met when my first daughter was 8 months old. Yes, 8 months old. And I took her to a rehearsal that Anna's theatre company was holding, where children were allowed in the room. And this was something that was never heard of. I haven't worked since I declared that I was pregnant when I was 5 months pregnant. So I hadn't worked for this whole kind of stretch of time. And suddenly there was this open door where I could take my child. And it was alternately exciting and frustrating, and she cried, but I was in the room and I felt part of it, and I was part of lots of other artists doing this. And as I went through that kind of early stage with my daughter, I just really struggled. I didn't have any support. I don't have family around me. I couldn't afford childcare, and I was rocking up at kind of auditions. I couldn't tour, and there was no support. And I just, I'd been brought up to kind of think I was equal in the world, and then here I was, kind of confined to my kitchen with this kid. And I spoke to Anna about it. I was like, it can't just be us. It can't just be me. And I'm relatively privileged. And so we started asking around. We spoke to people. We went to Equity, the Actors Union in England, and we said, look, we think this is a problem. We think this is a problem for lots of people. We're not sure if this is a thing, but it seems to be a thing for us. And they said, all right, here's £2,000. Why don't you have an event and find out? So the Young Vic Theatre gave us their space to host an event. We didn't even know if anybody would turn up, because it was invisible. No one spoke about it. Well, we knew it could have just been us in the room. And we had 400 people show up and over 70 babies. And it wasn't just actors, it wasn't just musicians or dancers or stage management, it was executives, it was casting directors, you know, bookers, everything. A whole room full of people kind of going, we can't work. And so after that, we realized that this was a thing, and that we needed to do something. We also realized that because parenting and caring is kind of seen as soft, there was no data, there was no evidence. This was a whole kind of group of people no one really was interested in, no one knew anything about, and it was invisible. So we set about conducting research. We got funding from the Arts Council of England. We worked with 14 organizations and we conducted a huge survey, and the challenge for people was epic, and it was very obvious to everybody. Then we had a kind of case for support. We worked with organizations, 14 of them initially, to see what they could do, see what we could come up with in response to the findings of this survey. Because we work antisocial hours, we go on tour, the show is in the evening, you know, and there was just this kind of prevailing, it's just the way that it is, nothing can be done. And we went, hang on, there's got to be something. Like inclusion and diversity is a massive focus in the performing arts. And so we worked with these organizations, and at the end of it, they came up with a best practice charter. We kind of facilitated that process. And it's a set of 10 guiding principles to help organizations work towards achieving best practice. We look at things like recruitment, we look at working practices, we look at additional resources, childcare, communication, and policies. And around this, we have created a program. So it's a kind of facilitated program that's kind of monitored and evaluated at every step of the way, so organizations can see their progress. We now have over 70 partners. We have 56 organizations taking part in the best practice charter program. And in theatre, the landscape has completely changed. You know, we have on-stage job shares, backstage job shares at every level of organizations, flexibility, and people are talking about it. You know, so it's a completely different landscape to when we set up 6 years ago.
That's beautiful. That's a fantastic example of, you know, a big push and starting the conversation indeed. And it's fascinating that it is both, I mean, people in the industry, so freelance workers, but not only artists, like really a lot of different profiles joined forces to address the issue, and organization responded. Because this is, you know, you know, a wild guess in a way, but it's nice to see that today you reach out to 70 organizations that in a way made commitments and had a review of their processes and adapted to, you know, reality, just that. Maybe I just go back to you, Louise, because in these process and these conversations, you also had to, in a way, have these conversations with venues and festivals and residency centers in order for your artists to, you know, access opportunities, and you being, you know, in between, you know, the arts, the artist and, you know, the gatekeepers, as we call them. You also had to somehow build the case, find the arguments, try to convince or to explain. I want you to share with us a little bit about this experience.
Yeah, sure. I will begin with a more pessimistic quote and trying to go more optimistic on the side. Recently, also in resonance with what Emeka said about the fathers, I want to share a little discomment we had. It's about an artist who is a father, who is already a father, is going to be a father again. He has multiple shows of this company presented in one big festival in France, and is going to be a father during this period. So we warned the organizers that he couldn't go like 5 months before the event. And I read a small quote of the answer of the organizer. I consider it a drift. I fully understand that artists have a private life and that in this life there is room to be mom and or dad. There is nothing to say otherwise. On the other hand, I do not conceive that these two realities are opposed to each other, that private life becomes an obstacle to professional lives and leads to questioning commitments made. Our entire profession is based on respect for certain fundamental values, including this one. But this was the answer we received after we warned this organizer 5 months before the event that it was not possible because the father wanted to be there for the birth of his child. So this is like 2023 now. We received it like a few months ago, but I want to share more optimistic part also that, for example, on the show I was backing up for many years, which is the show called Mad in Film with 7 women on stage from all over Europe. We decided quite quickly that we wanted to note on the very first draft we sent to organizer that we are coming with families. It was depending on the time, but it was written. We are coming with 4 to 6 babies. So it was like, so you have to find accommodation, and you have to not. We ask not to be in hostels, but in B&Bs, for example, like accommodation that are also close to the place where we were performing. There was no problem about that. The nice part was that the difficult one that is that it never happens that one organizer asks before. It's like we always have to ask. So it's from the recommendation part, we will go further. I think it's something really important to us because it's always us, like, or the team or the manager I represent, that we always have to ask. And we have to do this pedagogical matter. So from what Casey explained, is also very important, this matter of charter, etc., because it's also like a way of raising awareness, and it's not relying only on people who are concerned, like it's a public affair. So finally, mainly when we have this situation, now it's written, and it's written in the contract that we are coming with children. We need this kind of accommodation. We need the carers to be taken in charge for accommodation and food. The problem we have at the moment is that it's not taken in charge, that the travel, are not taken in charge. So this is for the moment it relies only on companies or the persons themselves. So when you speak about crossing borders, it goes fast.
Yeah, I can imagine, definitely. It is interesting, though, that, in a way, the artistic collective, with your support, came with a plan, in a way, came with a series of, bullet points in the technical writer saying, this is how it's going to happen. And this is, in a way, not negotiable. We'll not leave our kids behind just to please you and to, tick the box coming to your festival and developing or proposing the performance. So it is interesting that you took the lead, I think, and I can feel that the idea of this is a conversation that you are starting. I think you are right in saying that it cannot always be an individual conversation, and at some point to have guidance made public that everybody can refer to, just in case of, you know, wondering or discovering, and to have a charter or to have you know, websites proposing some sort of points that everybody should agree upon, etc., is valuable in terms of exchanging good practice and information. When it comes to welcoming artists, Emeka, I know that you run a space in Lagos. I don't know if you were, because you have this second hat of being also a host and being able to potentially welcome artists. Do you have some sort of policies or guidelines, or do you have some sort of mindset around welcoming artists with their families?
The thing is that, like, reality is that, you know, having residencies with kids could be very challenging. That's why from my experience, I just find being flexible on both sides, because you could plan everything and suddenly something goes wrong, and you have to be in that situation to be able to react and still make the thing work. So for us, it's important to just have kind of certain guidelines where we all work towards or see and say, okay, because the average parent that comes to a new space will want a space that is safe. We want a space that is depending on the age of the child. We also want a space where the person will have access to healthcare if there's an emergency. They want to have a space also where maybe mobility also, if they want to go from one place to the other. For example, if most people come with a kid, so probably if you have maybe a bicycle that has a child carrier or whatever, so the person is more flexible, the person can go on short trips. So basic things like that, you just have to kind of take care of. And then I think our own advantage is that we kind of almost organized as a community where, you know, like, for example, when it comes to educational activities for the kid, nearby we have like a private school that one can easily integrate any kid in the private school. It's near, the parents can also always go and kind of check on the kid whenever the person wants. So it's really a bit like a close-knitted community. But basically, it's just like everyone needs to be flexible, because you can't plan everything. You know, you can plan and then suddenly the kid becomes sick. What do? You know, like you have to really react and make sure that it works. And then I find one important thing is also, it is a big financial burden, even on the artist, because most times you find that an artist want to come with his or her kid, but you find that once a kid is around 2 years, the kid already pays the full cost of a ticket. So you find, you know, even traveling with a kid as an artist, you have to almost make provision for almost an adult, as if the kid is an adult when it comes to moving from one place to the other.
It is interesting because what you describe is also, it not only takes a conversation, as we were saying, but it also takes a community. And it's a community project almost to be able to welcome parents in your venue, residency space, festival, etc., in the sense that you have to put into place way more than just a space, or way more than just, you know, this is the emergency number in case you need it, but it takes much more effort than that. I like very much that you insist on the flexibility aspect, and also that you you know, highlight the healthcare, but I would say almost the well-being of parents because of the worry involved. And this is something that we hear also quite often, young parents being worried to just leave their kid even next room when they are rehearsing or practicing or, you know, performing. So it takes way more than just a couple of elements to make sure that everything goes according to plan. And then what also is interesting is that you bring the money issue in the conversation. When we talk about parenting in the arts, quite often, especially at when working internationally, we hear testimonies or comments saying, I don't have the financial capacity to be able to offer this, not only because of the airfare and the extra, you know, tickets we need to support to be able to welcome not only the artist, but also their families, but also because of this infrastructure almost, or this, you know, these conditions that you have to put together to be able to, you know, welcome parents in, you know, in good conditions. So the money is something that we hear quite often. When monitoring the open calls, around 700 or 800 calls that we publish every year on our website, open calls for residencies, open calls for, you know, participating in festival programs, open calls for grants from very diverse, you know, projects or funding bodies. We don't see very often, even I would say we never see, you know, in the criteria or the conditions offer that a special attention would be put onto parents, artists and their families for, you know, obvious financial conditions. However, we also see quite a lot of examples year after year of especially residency programs showcasing that they welcome families, or they even have a special, you know, title or segment of activity dedicated to artist parent. So we see that the needle is moving, or the conversation is changing or growing. The level of awareness is also growing. But I was wondering if, apart from the money issue, you see other elements that prevent artists and cultural professionals to access international opportunities.
Well, the thing is, like, I think it might depend on different regions, because typically, if most artists in the global north will be a bit skeptical of coming, especially when if they are parents, you know, taking up a residency in Africa, you know, with their kid. I think my experience, they will be a bit skeptical in doing that, because, you know, obviously, but I think it's something cultural. If you're not used to, or if you think that where you're about to go is a bit culturally, you know, too diverse or whatever, you might be skeptical to kind of take that plunge. Yeah, but apart from that, I find it actually depends on the offer being made. Because I'm being practical, most artists get offers of a residency that in the space is okay, the money to, you know, buy their flight tickets and live on during that residency, if they can afford it, I think, or if they think it's okay for them, I think they will take it up, because I think majority of artists want that experience of the other space, you know, to experiment, to explore, and, you know, kind of develop their work further. But I find personally, no matter how idealistic you are, I think most artists will think about the practical end of how practical is it. can I afford it? Am I having enough funding that will warrant me moving from one space to the other?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, practicalities do matter. I see you, Casey, nodding. In terms of, I mean, what would prevent, artist parents or cultural professionals, parents to access foreign opportunities or international opportunities?
I think there's lots of, so much of this conversation, you said there's not one solution fits all. It's a multifaceted challenge, and it requires a kind of a multifaceted approach. And there's several things I wanted to pick up on. So the things that Louise, Michelle, that you're talking about, Emeka, that you're talking about, we have names for all of these things that we promote to our partners, and these are all things that signal invitation and belonging and welcome. So whether your venue is in Africa, whether it's in Scotland, whether it's in Thailand, if you have the right communication and the right signs and the right messaging, that person knows that they will be welcome and safe in your company with their children, then they will come to your venues. So ideally, a venue or a festival producer will reach out, so they take the onus off the individual, because when the individual has to come forward and say, I'm a parent and carer, how can you support me? Then already they feel like they're slightly asking for something that other people aren't getting. Whereas actually, if the responsibility is the employer to say, or the festival to say, what do you need? What do you need in order to come and do your work at our festival? And how can we support that? So we've just published, which I'll share in a minute, because it's freely available, an access rider. So we see caring responsibilities like any other access need. So on the form, you don't need to specify what your situation is, but simply what you need in order to be able to come. And that's a really helpful document for organizations to kind of know what could be asked of them and what could be expected. The second thing, Emeka, what I loved about what you say, we call that a welcome pack. So a family-friendly welcome pack. And it's basically something that all PIPA organizations have. And it covers what the venue facilities are. So is there a fridge for breast milk? Is there a breastfeeding room? Do they provide childcare? Is there a list of local childcare providers? What are the travel arrangements? How do they get there? Is it family friendly? Can you store a buggy there? What are the family friendly accommodation options? And what local facilities? Emeka, you talked about medical facilities, and a parent needs to know, what those facilities are, and that will give them confidence to come. And we have two things I just wanted to mention. One is we call it a PIPA champion. So it's somebody within the organization who is like a kind of signposter. So in the family-friendly welcome pack, organizations can say, if you experience a caring-related problem, this is your person who will support you and signpost you where you need to be. And that dedicated person is then available for any emergencies or any questions. And the second is what we call a PIPA pot. So people are always going to continue having care-related emergencies. And the extent to which that is going to impact your production or your organization depends on what provision you already have in place. Otherwise, what we see is organizations ending up with kind of emergencies all over the place that they have to mitigate anyway. So our partner organizations, not all of them, and it's not widely publicized, but we've introduced this thing called a PIPA pot, which is a ring-fenced budget line that organizations have in case of a caring-related need or emergency. you know, whether that's, one example was a father who was rehearsing a play. He was booked for a long time. He was rehearsing a play. His wife was due to give birth at the beginning of rehearsals, and he needed that time off at the beginning of rehearsals, which they gave him, and financially they had the pipicle, so they were able to kind of get a replacement for that period of time. So they were prepared for that scenario. They got the actor they wanted, and the show went on. So what we advocate for is that organizations are prepared and resourced adequately at the sort of planning stages, so that when people do present with caring responsibilities, they're able to support. Yeah, that's the variety of.
No, but that's very informative, also in terms of tools that you create to answer the needs. And I guess, Louise Michel, you want also to
I acknowledge totally what Casey said, and I just want to share also that we are in an employers syndicate in France, in a Circus Employers Syndicate, and we are advocating at the moment for a financial support when you start again after giving birth, because also this is a period where you are not you don't compulsorily want to be back on stage right after your time, your due time, but you would like to be back in the collective and to know what's going on, what are the next creation, etc. But most of the time the company cannot afford that. So we are advocating for a financial support for this, so that the person could be on tour without performing. She's back, she or he back on tour and see the collective, can be back on rehearsals, not performing but on rehearsal, and recover physically, as I was talking before, and get in touch for future creations, etc. And so finding being back on stage with no brutal transition. So also about money possibilities.
But also, I mean, because you are working a lot in collaboration with other collectives, but also you are part of these, are advocating within several, you know, organizations or unions or syndicates or federations. I mean, you are really part of the you know, industry conversation around parenting. Do you have also other recommendations or you know, the ideas that you put forward, you know, and try to raise awareness or design specific tools in France?
I think we have already named many of, especially when Casey talked about like the charter, the bullet list, the fact that the organizer take the responsibility, the money for travels, accommodations and food, what I was talking about, the recovery, physical recovery period. Also, it's like a more global thing about this discussion inside teams. Like, it requires also that you are a bit trained to organize this. You cannot improvise this. Also, that it's about, we are talking about this matter of parenting, care, and mobility, but it's a global issue that we are not so good at this in cultural organizations, having a social discussions. What are their needs? What are the rules? How we can adapt, and we can. So this is like a more global one, and also like a more global recommendation would be not to focus on mothers and women to do this job. Like as I said, also take in consideration the partners, and it will help everybody. Like more on that. And yeah, like the maybe last thing I will say before the question and answer is also trying to adjust the rhythm to the most vulnerable profile, like solo parents. So it will benefit to all the others. because for example, like we have this example like solo parents, and we are trying to adjust that, and we know that it is really better for the others also. And this is something I saw in the Point of Entry podcast you were mentioning at the beginning. Was also interesting. Like, also this issue could help us for many other issues that are here in the cultural field that we don't address.
Yeah, no, it is very interesting, and this goes back to the access rider that you were talking about, Casey. Of, you know, how do you put into place mechanisms that can actually cater for very different needs, not only the needs of the parents, but of disabled artists and many other, you know, people in our sector that could actually benefit for accompaniment measures or for support to actually deliver the best and be able to thrive in their work. I'm going to open the floor to the participants and attendees of today. I'm not sure you used the chat to post questions or comments or links, but you can definitely use your digital hand and make sure that we can see you if you want to take the floor and contribute with you know, lived experience, examples that you encountered in your professional trajectory, but also resources or ideas. We are very keen to collect ideas and recommendations. Before giving the floor to participants, I just have a question around this international dimension that we focus on today, and the advocacy part. I mean, we heard from the three of you that you have boiled down many arguments and translated that into practical tools, be it, you know, contracts, being technical writers or access writers, being a charter, etc. What do you think we should be advocating towards, you know, arts councils, ministries of cultures, EU institutions? What are the elements we could shape collectively to actually raise the awareness even further and propose very practical measures?
For me, I think you know, when one is dealing with institutions, I think we should have programs that are actually more tailored to kind of encourage parents or artists that are parents to apply for these residencies, because I think that will really help in changing the attitude of both art practitioners and also facilitators. Because the thing is that, like, being an artist and parenting and being wanting or having this urge to be mobile, to go to residencies, does not diminish your professionalism or the quality of the work you do as an artist. So if we can, I know there are already, you know, institutions that, you know, precisely invite artists with families and with kids to apply for residencies, but I think it's still very the minority at the moment. I think there should be an advocacy to increase such possibilities for artists with families or with kids.
Mm-hmm. Louise, do you have some suggestions on your side?
Yeah, but advocating globally, which do you mean? Yeah, which point we would like to advocate especially, like really raising awareness and like money support from organizers.
Okay, so the host and more than the politicians.
Mm-hmm.
And Casey,
My wish list is long, but I'll keep it brief. I was just, so first of all, just to respond to the question about funding. Certainly in the UK, it's not very clear about what you can and can't apply for in terms of well, it is clear actually. The access costs on an Arts Council application, for example, you cannot include childcare related expenses. That's something that we've been advocating for a long time. But I do know that the way lots of companies do it is building it into their practice. It's so into the kind of the body of the application. And I know, lots of organizations have got funding for a kind of creche, for childcare, for assistance. Personally, we would like to see it as part of the as part of the access entitlement that is offered from funders. And the other thing I would say from organizations is when they have funding deadlines, please don't put them in the holidays. Please don't put them in the childcare holidays. The amount of CEOs of big organizations who have these huge deadlines in the middle of the holidays, and it makes it really challenging. I think on a political level, accessible, affordable, flexible childcare is an absolute necessity from every government, and the UK is really far behind on that. But we are working towards that. Shared parental leave is another, because this isn't a women's issue. This is a collective issue, and we have to empower men to take up their kind of, it's their equality, equal status at work and at home for men and women and same-sex partners. So I would say shared parental leave and childcare. They're my two political policy asks.
And political, let's be honest, and political. Thank you for these recommendations. It is also interesting that many of these points are related to mindset, it feels. I mean, in terms of equality, as you said, but also when Emeka was talking about in a way, we have to fight this feeling of lack of legitimacy or lack of credibility as soon as you are parent. Like suddenly you start from scratch because you had a kid, so you have gaps in your resume, or you have all these things that we have to fight. And especially for artists, like you shouldn't be feeling that you start from scratch. I can see that we have a couple of questions in the chat, and I'm probably gonna ask first or read Rebecca Nord questions. Are you, for example, in the UK or France, applying for funding to help with these issues already when you apply for funding to create a performance? So, I mean, Casey, you answered a little bit in relation of these costs as such not being eligible. What about in France, Louise Michel?
It is not. I don't know all, of course, but I don't see it mentioned anywhere. So, for example, for a show that we are producing at the moment, and the artist is going to give birth at the end of this month, we want to include this in the budget. But I think we will do the same way as Cassie said, that we will put inside the application into the application, and if we are asked in the details, we will explain more that we need this and this, and why did we put this line of budget. But yeah, no, at the moment,
not as such. I see a message from Eva in the chat. I'm a visual artist and performer, and for me, one of the most important questions is how open calls sometimes demand to be present for several weeks, even months, which seems difficult to stand up to as a parent. Most often, I don't even apply. it would be great if in open calls, the times given would be, again, more flexible and depend on the time needed by the artist instead of given in advance. Could this idea be included in an access rider or other chart in the future? I think this is a valid point in terms of flexibility, but I'm not here to judge. So if you have comments, the three of you.
Is this to do with an open call? I'm not really sure I understand the question. Is it that the date is kind of set so far in advance, or?
It is like you apply to, or you see a call for residency in Nicaragua, and it is 3 months, you know, and 3 months seems like a lot for parents to be away, even with their kids, you know, even if all the conditions are wonderful. So the idea of the lack of flexibility in these open calls for projects or for residencies, etc. If I understood the question, but don't hesitate, Eva, to post again if I didn't.
Excuse me, do you hear me?
Yes.
So it meant mostly the duration of the residencies is often given in the open call. But it's for me, for example, it's impossible to be present for like 3 months at a time. And I don't even think that, for example, for certain projects, it should be obligatory to be there for such a long time if the project in itself could be realized in a shorter time. But at the same time, there are residencies which don't give you the flexibility like you've mentioned before, and I think it's a key. And that's why I'm asking if this could be probably incorporated into another charter or something that you are preparing, probably maybe for France even. That would be great. So it was just something to mention. It's rather a comment than a question, it's true, but I think it's to be considered also on the long term. Thank you.
I just want to jump in quickly. Hello, everyone. It's Hettie Judah from On the Move. When the podcast episode that Points of Entry did with On the Move with Hettie Judah, we talked actually about this in the podcast, and we specifically talked about this idea of duration, and that one specific need in terms of mobility is the need to be flexible and being like, well, I can't be on site for 3 months, and so I maybe need 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off, or whatever the combination that works for you, basically. And I think that this is also an interesting point, that maybe this particular issue as it relates to mobility combines with some other stuff that On the Move works on and advocates for, which is things like green mobility. So even if you're not a parent, like maybe it's also interesting for you to because you have other needs that are nothing to do with parenting, but it could be this idea of hybridity. And so it's really focusing on, maybe it's going to be part virtual and part on site. And I think it's just this whole, what we're talking about really is this mindset shift from, the institution as really being of service to the artist, instead of being like the artist as something, instead of kind of the other way around, which I think is unfortunately how a lot of this space functions. And so that is a really long-term generational mindset shift, I think. But, unfortunately, a lot of these spaces, like, they just don't, we're still at the level, I think, of trying to get enough people to listen to it and be like, oh, we need to change how we're doing things. And maybe this is one of those spaces, basically.
Thank you for this, and thank you also, Eva, for bringing this particular aspect on. I think indeed, both the deadlines during holidays, the flexibility in terms of calendar, agenda, the lengths of projects and residencies are very interesting points, and definitely for open calls, but also for funders supporting mobility, trips, basically giving travel grants, etc. Working around or taking these aspects on board could be an interesting recommendation. I'm just checking now if there are other points that were shared in the chat. I could see if there is. Please let me know or take the floor. You see, it's quite open. I see. Elon, I'm wondering what your experience is in how artists manage to combine their roles as artists and as a parent during residencies. I used to apply to residencies to take a step back from my daily conditions and surroundings. Now, as a parent, I don't want to be away from my family, but still want to focus on artistic work. This situation puts me in a split. Do you have any reaction to this? Emeka?
I think it's a natural reaction for every parent, because definitely you want, as I said before, an environment that will be safe for you and the kids or the kids. So I think if you're interested in really going for residency and you apply and you get accepted, I think the next step is to start a conversation with the facilitator. I think it's the job then of the facilitator to kind of assure you or reassure you, depending on your needs, that at least to an extent, those needs will be met. And I think if you get those assurances, I think that will give you more confidence to go ahead. But I think this, just the conversation will determine actually how you feel, or how to trust the facilitator.
Mm-hmm. It is interesting and important, because you touch upon also the psychology, or the notion of care and well-being. So what are the conditions you propose to reassure parents? But I understand also the comment on being, willing or wanting to focus on an artistic practice, so to be kind of isolated and away from anything that could, disturb the very making of an artwork, and at the same time being very keen to just spend time with your family and to navigate these paradox that is very difficult to navigate, probably. So I hear you. Do we have other comments? I don't see questions. Anaïs Gabo is asking if we know of other examples of good practices in other sectors. So I don't know if during the, I'm going back to the speakers, if in your process of designing tools, etc., you went to other fields like sports, academic world, businesses, to actually compare, contrast, or be inspired by what was existing in other fields and try to adapt it or import it in our cultural field. Louise, you wanted to react on this one.
Yeah. At the beginning, I was talking about Basinga company. She is the one who's leading the conversation at the moment in Circus in France, and so she's a tight warrior artist, very high. Higher distance, and she is also like a high-level sport athlete. So she went to search in the sports field, And there is, like in France, there is a national center for everything, but the national center for high-level athletes, and they are taken in charge like really globally, like food, recovery after giving birth, during the pregnancy, mental support, etc., etc. And it was like kind of raising awareness for her that we are at this level and we don't have almost anything of this. So this is also a place where I think we will have to go a bit deeper and to have exchanges, because, for example, for circus artists, there is a high intensity of physical things, and this is maybe we are going to dig into this field.
Mm. That's interesting how the athletes have access to very special conditions, and athletes from the arts don't yet. Let's put it this way. Casey.
The ballet, so the big ballet companies have physiotherapists and have rehabilitation kind of on site, and sports science, like you say, has made huge progress. And one of the things that we've just been looking at in a report that's coming out shortly is about dancers and what you were saying, Louise Michel, about the physical recovery of dancers. So there's a lot of study about the impact of pregnancy on the body, and there's a lot of study of kind of ballet dancers, and a lot of sports science, but there's nothing where these two kind of come together. And what you see there is a huge risk of injury and a sort of self-defined back to work plan that isn't founded in science. The science is there, but it's not accessible. And maybe there is a need for more research specifically around those disciplines, in the same way that there has been, in sports.
No, it is very interesting also how I guess everybody tries to find solution, as you said, sometimes in an emergency response, or trusting individuals to come with a plan, which is not a given. I mean, to come with a full plan and to have the distance and knowledge and everything to be able to propose something coherent, consistent, and etc. So I hear also the growing part of each organization would be also to be able to share examples of practices. So as part of us EU networks, and I'm thinking all these EU networks from ITM for performing arts, or Circus Strata for circus and street arts, European Theatre Convention for theatre, so how these sectorial networks also could include these theme as a working theme and a conversation among organizers and stakeholders in their respective fields, and make sure, in a way, everybody can raise awareness of the conditions. It feels also, because you bring some national examples, that to be able to access the information around the legal aspect of it would also be helpful. I know in France, the National Center for Theatre, Street Art and Circus have published a first guide on the matter, listing all the legal issues, all the legal help you could find, from different public funding bodies or private bodies being able to support parenting. And I guess this is also something that is useful to access, work or legal, legal frameworks and employers' regulations and etc. I mean, to have this information accessible. And I guess, we are here in countries where this might be easy, but I have in mind many countries that maybe don't have the same, access to information. I'm just gonna maybe conclude now, because I see it's almost time. I see also that there are comments, very interesting comments in the chat with links shared, examples shared. So we will make sure that after this webinar, we will publish a resource, an info page where we will share the links exchanged, not only the ones exchanged today, but the one we collected already in the past of different initiatives around this particular topic. And we will make sure that this webinar is available online. It will appear, of course, at our partner, Horan TV, but it will also be available from On The Move website and On The Move YouTube channel. So at least you can forward it, share it. I saw that one of the suggestions was to share it with arts councils, officers and funding bodies, which is a great proposal. But at least this video or this recording can be circulated further. The last maybe point I would like to share with you is that in a couple of months, because we are continuing to work on this topic, we aim at publishing a very short report on parenting, care and cultural mobility. So try to summarize the many testimonies we collected, but also today's conversation and further research, desk research we will be doing in the coming weeks. So before the summer, you will have like a short publication, and hopefully it will, serve in whatever context to continue the conversation with your local, national authorities, EU colleagues, international arts organizations, etc. I'm going to take the time to thank each of the three panelists. Thank you very much, Louise Michel, Cassie and Emeka, for contributing so brilliantly to the conversation, sharing your personal experience, but also the achievements that you had across in the last years, also to share the toolkits that you had, the bag of tricks you created along the year, but also to share the philosophy, the values or principles that we should be reflecting upon and continue to work on. So thank you to my colleagues, Marie Le Sourd, Cathy Watts, Jess Partridge, and to our live captioner today, who was typing like crazy everything we said. So I want to thank you. In the chat, you will find both a link towards a very quick evaluation form that we would, love you to fill in. It's just 5 or 6 questions, so it's very easy and very quick, but it will help us and inform us for the next webinars. And of course, I can only encourage you to register to subscribe to the On The Move newsletters, especially if you're interested in receiving open calls for residencies, for festivals, etc., and to see the many information and resources we circulate around. Thank you very much to everybody. Thank you.